Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator of the Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial.
While you are unable to visit the ship during this unprecedented pandemic, please enjoy this free virtual tour of Battleship New Jersey. Every year, we bring tens of thousands of students for hands-on math, science, and history programs, veterans like the sailors and Marines who served on the ship, and tourists to the Camden waterfront to see our museum. Please consider supporting us as we educate the public and preserve the vessel and all the stories of those who served aboard her. Find out more at battleshipnewjersey.org/give and enjoy your tour.
Welcome to the Battleship New Jersey, the world's greatest battleship. The New Jersey is a member of the Iowa class, the last battleship class constructed for the U.S. Navy, and at 887 feet 7 inches is the longest battleship ever built. New Jersey has also traveled more miles and fired more shells than any other battleship, and with 19 battle and campaign stars, is the most decorated of all 57 U.S. battleships. New Jersey served with distinction in 4 commissioning periods and several wars: World War II in the 1940s, the Korean War in the 1950s, the Vietnam War in the late 1960s, and the Cold War and Lebanese Civil War in the 1980s. She would undergo many upgrades and refits as weaponry, living accommodations, and technology would change over her decades of service. First commissioned in 1943, New Jersey belongs to an era when wood decks were still used on warships. She has a teak wood deck, a dense, oily wood that provides several benefits. It is very slip-resistant when wet, does not easily burn, and is also resistant to rot. The deck is also a good insulator. The New Jersey was not built with air conditioning, and the wood layer prevents the sun from striking the 1.5-inch thick steel deck below it, keeping crew berthing spaces cooler. The forecastle is the forwardmost part of the main deck, and is where the ground tackle, the collective anchor chain, and windlass equipment is located. Each of the ship's 2 anchors weighs 30,000 pounds. They are attached to 1,122-foot-long anchor chains, each individual chain link of which weighs roughly 123 pounds. The Wildcat anchor windlasses rotate to raise or lower the anchors, controlled by the nearby wheels. The inner wheel pair serves as the brakes, locking the Wildcats in place. The outer capstans are for mooring lines, which can be wrapped around them. When activated, these capstans would wind the lines up, dragging the ship towards a pier. The disc cone cage antenna is also located here. Used for ship-to-ship communication, this array was installed for the ship's 3rd commissioning in 1968 during the Vietnam War. Moving along, a ladder leads below to second deck. The anchor windlass room is located here. This compartment contains the motors that drive the windlasses on the deck above. At the forward end of the compartment are 2 thick white pipes. These are the tubes that the anchor chains move through and lead to the chain lockers where the anchor chain piles up. Much of the second deck is devoted to enlisted crew berthing. This area is called forward enlisted berthing and was home to 76 crewmen. Every sailor has his own bunk or rack. The racks you see were installed for the ship's 4th commissioning in the 1980s and were nicknamed coffin racks by the sailors on account of their general size and enclosed nature. Previously, folding wire frame mattress racks decorated these spaces. For personal storage, a sailor had the space under the rack and their own locker. Here, they must store changes of uniform, toiletries, and personal materials such as books, magazines, or playing cards. An item that cannot fit in either place cannot be brought aboard. Off-duty crew could play board games on the tables, read, write letters home, watch news broadcasts or movies on the closed-circuit television system, or even organize into sports teams to compete against the crews of other ships. The deck here has tan tile, signifying that this area is an enlisted crewman's area. Blue-tiled areas signify officers' country, and other tile colors such as red and green signify workspaces. Average off-duty tan tile sailors could not set foot on blue tile unless invited by an officer. There are also several examples of sailor art here. While sailors throughout the ship's career would decorate their living and working spaces with art that represented them as a crew or a division, crew members in the 1980s were allowed to do it officially. These berthing spaces were used by the 6th Division bosun's mates, crewmen in charge of the decks, lines, chains, and anchors. Their department logo, located on their uniform, was crossed anchors. This area also has a watertight trunk, leading to the very bottom of the ship, 6 decks below. At the bottom is a pump room. These trunks were used as evacuation routes in case of an emergency or simply as direct paths to lower decks. The officers' wardroom is where the ship's officers would have all their meals. Officers were seated based on rank. Senior officers sat here, while the junior-most officers sat at the other end of the compartment. Officers followed several rules during mealtimes. They were not allowed to discuss politics, religion, or use profane language. The wardroom was presided over by the ship's executive officer, who lived in a nearby cabin. Officers could not sit down and begin eating until the executive officer gave the word. The officers' lounge is also nearby. Installed for the Vietnam Commission, off-duty officers could read, write letters, and socialize in this space. However, the officers were not allowed to take naps or have snacks in this area. The passage surrounding the wardroom served as access to senior officers' staterooms. The flag mounted to the bulkhead in the wardroom was hung behind then-President Ronald Reagan when he gave a speech and recommissioned the ship in December 1982. He is the only sitting president to commission a battleship, and the only president to set foot on the New Jersey. Much of the rest of this deck was originally enlisted berthing spaces. Today, it is dedicated to the museum's exhibit spaces. Here you can find displays dedicated to the life and career of Fleet Admiral William Halsey, Chief Petty Officers, International Battleship Development and History, Life Aboard New Jersey, the history of the Big J, and the stories of the New Jerseyans who helped build, sail, and preserve the battleship. The ship's 1980s-era radio room is located on this deck as well. Here, the ship could send and receive secure messages. It also houses the equipment that controls the red radio phones found around the ship. There are 11 levels above the main deck, making up the superstructure of the New Jersey. The first, the 01 level, is primarily dedicated to officers' cabins. At the forwardmost end were the captain's cabin and the 1980s admiral's cabin. The admiral's cabin you see today was renovated out of several junior officer staterooms for Admiral J. Paul Reason, who commanded Battle Group Romeo from New Jersey. He was the only admiral to make the battleship his flagship during the 1980s commissioning. Adjacent to Admiral Reason's cabin is the captain's in-port cabin. This comfortable, well-decorated area was used by the New Jersey's 19 commanding officers to entertain visiting dignitaries, foreign leaders, celebrities, high-ranking Navy officials, or anyone else of importance who might come aboard the ship. Some of the distinguished guests in this compartment include the Crown Prince of Norway, Bob Hope, Anne Margaret, and President Reagan. He could also meet with his senior officers here or just do some work at his desk. This also served as the captain's private dining area. The captain didn't eat in the wardroom with the other officers unless they invited him. The captain could order food at any time of day from his private pantry and typically ate alone by naval tradition. He was, however, free to invite anyone he felt like to join him. The berthing space attached to the main living area could only be used while the ship was docked. While the battleship was underway, international maritime law required the captain to sleep closer to the navigation bridge. In this display case, you can see a laser-engraved replica of the silver bottle holder used to christen the ship on December 7, 1942. This was the first anniversary of the raid on Pearl Harbor, and a message to the Axis powers that the Iowa-class battleships would soon be on the gun line. Traditionally, champagne is used for a ship's launching, but a bottle of New Jersey wine was used instead. Miss Carolyn Edison, the wife of then-Governor Charles Edison, had the honor of christening the New Jersey. Charles Edison, the son of famed inventor Thomas Edison, had previously served as acting Secretary of the Navy under President Roosevelt, where he had been instrumental in the early development of the Iowa-class battleships. After being commissioned in May of 1943, New Jersey would make her way to the Pacific, joining the U.S. Navy's island-hopping operations and participating in various engagements. This began with Operation Hailstorm, the invasion of the Japanese harbor of Truk Lagoon. It would be the only time New Jersey would fire her guns at another ship. Above the captain's cabin is the Combat Engagement Center, or CEC. As designed, this space was the original admiral's cabin, very similar in design and function to the captain's cabin. This is where famous World War II admirals like Admiral Spruance and Admiral Halsey lived while New Jersey served as their flagships. The admiral's cabin was eliminated in the 1980s refit as nowhere else was large enough or easily accessible enough to house the equipment it now holds. The CEC controls all of the missiles and missile defense systems added to the battleship in the 1980s. It has 4 Tomahawk computers, 2 Harpoon computers, air search and surface search radar to identify everything around the battleship, among other equipment. The CEC was commanded by the Tactical Action Officer. From his swivel chair in the center of the room, the TAO, as he was known, could oversee everything going on, relay the captain's orders, and make tactical decisions with the information on the various status boards scattered around CEC. Just aft of CEC is the Admiral's Chief of Staff's cabin. The Chief of Staff was a lower-ranking admiral or captain who assisted the lead admiral. Restored in 2006, this is one of the only living areas on the ship that retains its 1940s appearance with no deck tile and green-painted bulkheads. Nearby passages contain junior officer staterooms, less spacious than the senior officer staterooms. Junior officer staterooms contain 2 to 4 bunks. Both junior and senior officer staterooms contain sinks, storage areas, and desks on which to do paperwork. The signal bridge was used to send communications while out at sea when radio messages might have been ill-advised. Symmetrically located on either side of the superstructure, each signal bridge had a flag bag, which stored signal flags that could be run up on halyard lines. As each flag represented a letter or number, messages could easily be spelled out in flag columns. The signal bridges were also equipped with a signal light for sending messages in Morse code. A set of big-eye binoculars helped the crew to see messages from other ships. A third method of communicating was using semaphore flags. A sailor would hold the flags and place their arms in different positions, each position representing a different letter or number. Conveniently located just forward of the signal bridge is the Admiral's flag bridge. There's no steering equipment here, but the flag bridge gives the Admiral an enclosed area to sit and observe the fleet around the battleship. Phones allow him to send orders to the captain, while his proximity to the signal bridge allows him to easily send orders to the rest of his fleet. The 5 stars on the deck were laid by the ship's Vietnam-era crew to commemorate Fleet Admiral Halsey, a New Jersey native and the last admiral to reach the rank of 5 stars. With New Jersey as his flagship, Admiral Halsey commanded the 3rd Fleet from here during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest surface battle in naval history. Though New Jersey and the 3rd Fleet were destined to never come in contact with the enemy forces. Following a minor refit back east, New Jersey saw the end of World War II from a distance, stationed in Okinawa while the surrender ceremony took place on her sister ship, Missouri. After the war, New Jersey was one of many ships that helped carry U.S. troops home and was finally taken out of commission for the first time in 1948. Directly above the flag bridge is the navigation bridge, dominated by the conning tower. At 17.5 inches thick, this is the thickest single piece of armor and the most heavily protected part of the ship. It is designed to withstand the firepower of enemy battleships during combat. Each door alone weighs nearly 4,000 pounds. Within the conning tower is one of the ship's wheels, as well as various pieces of navigational equipment. The slits in the tower exist mostly for ventilation and communication, while periscopes allow the crew to see out. Engine order telegraphs allow the helmsman to signal the engine rooms what speed is needed, while rudder indicators show the angle of the ship's 2 massive rudders. As heavily protected as the conning tower is, it is still vulnerable. As redundancy is critical on a warship, there are 3 other places the ship could be steered from. Higher in the superstructure, there is the 08 level flying bridge, unarmored but with superior line of sight, while deep in the hull, just on the waterline, is Central Station. Visually blind but well protected. Aft emergency steering, located just above the rudders and housing the rudder machinery, housed in its own armored box, provides a final backup. Outside of the tower, a few more pieces of equipment can be found, including another radar repeater and a compass repeater. There is 1 chair on the navigation bridge, reserved for the captain. Whenever the main guns fired, the windows had to be rolled down, or else the concussive force of the blast would shatter them. While the helmsman could not see much out of the tower, this did not concern him. Navigation was accomplished in the chart house after the tower, where navigation charts told the crew everything about the water depth and currents. Later in the New Jersey's career, navigation radar also became available. The captain's sea cabin is located just off of the chart room. While the ship is at sea, he is required to sleep here, so if an emergency rises while he is off duty, he can be on the bridge immediately. Above the navigation bridge, on the 05 level, is the open bridge. Like the Admiral's Bridge, there is no wheel here, but the open bridge does contain navigation equipment to control the ship's speed and show direction. From here, a civilian harbor pilot could help the crew navigate through an unfamiliar harbor to safely dock. Further aft along the 05 level are most of the ship's 1980s-era missile defense systems. New Jersey and the other Iowa-class battleships had a three-stage missile defense system controlled from CEC. Atop the main superstructure tower on the 011 level is the Slick 32 Electronic Countermeasures, or ECM system. These boxes could put out a powerful jamming signal that could fry a missile's guidance systems and cause it to crash. The second stage of defense consisted of Super Rapid Bloom Offboard Chaff Launchers, or SURBOCs. These tubes could fire a canister 700 feet into the air, where it would explode into a cloud of aluminum shavings. This cloud would distract the missile while the battleship turned away. The final defense system was the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, or CWIS Gatling gun. New Jersey is the only museum ship to still carry her full complement of CWIS mounts, 4 in total. Containing a radar sensitive enough to track its own bullets, the Phalanx could fire at a rate of 3,000 rounds of depleted uranium ammo a minute, though it was only given 989 rounds before it had to be reloaded. Aft and amidships is the ceremonial bridge. Here, a traditional magnetic compass stands ready to be used should no other means of navigation be available. Where there were once a plethora of anti-aircraft guns, there are now the missile decks. The New Jersey carried 32 Tomahawk missiles in 8 armored box launchers. The ship carried conventional land attack and sea attack Tomahawks with flight ranges of 250 to 675 miles. It cannot be confirmed or denied that the battleship was ever equipped with the 1,500-mile range nuclear Tomahawks then in the Navy's arsenal, but the launchers were capable of firing them. The ship also carried 16 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, a shorter-ranged missile designed to sink hostile ships at a maximum range of around 85 miles. Neither type of missile could be reloaded at sea. New Jersey, along with the other 3 Iowa-class battleships, was brought back by the Reagan administration in response to the new Soviet Kirov-class missile cruisers. With their heavy guns and enough deck space to have missiles installed, the Iowa class could be a strong deterrent to these ships, while their heavy armor would protect them from enemy missiles. New Jersey would never use her missiles in anger, with her only 1980s combat being shore bombardment off the coast of Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War in late 1983 into 1984. Below the missile decks, the aft superstructure is given over to workshops. It is here that the ship's TV studio is located. The studio, and its corresponding control computers, broadcast to all the TVs in the berthing areas. The TV studio produced new broadcasts to inform the crew about the ship's future ports of call or other important news. It could also be used to play movies, 2 of which were shown a day, as well as play training videos so crew could train for new jobs without having to go ashore. Located amidships, the boat deck was used to launch and recover the ship's boats. Currently, the davits hold 2 motor whaleboats, manned 24/7 when the ship was at sea in case of man-overboard emergencies. The crew's Liberty launch, used to reach shore in ports too small for the massive battleship to tie up alongside a pier, is located on the port side, while the Admiral's barge, available to take the Admiral to other ships in his fleet or ashore, is on the starboard side. New Jersey currently has 6 5-inch 38 caliber twin gun mounts, forming the secondary battery. Originally, there were 10 of these mounts aboard, but 4 were removed to free up weight and space for the missiles and boat davits during the 1980s refit. Each mount could fire 15 to 22 rounds a minute per gun to a range of 8 to 10 miles. Various types of ammunition were carried, including high-capacity shells, variable-timed anti-aircraft shells, and illuminating star shells that allowed the gun crews to see targets at night. Each shell weighed around 55 pounds and needed a 28-pound powder cartridge. Up to 13 crewmen would squeeze inside the Mount's gunhouse. Crews hand-loaded the shells and powder, operated the fuse-setting computers, and manned the training and elevation stations that helped aim the guns. Mounts were usually controlled remotely in the secondary battery plotting rooms. Below the Mount, another dozen crewmen worked in the upper handling room, loading shells and powder into the hoists in the central stalk that delivered them to the gunhouse. In wartime, the ship was allotted 500 shells and powder charges per barrel, with up to 2 twin mounts fed from one magazine. In total, there could be 2,000 rounds stored in a magazine, with 21 more crewmen passing them to the gun mounts. One mount was operated by the ship's Marine detachment, who also acted as security, police, and guard force aboard. The sole exception was the Vietnam commissioning, in which there was no Marine detachment aboard. The New Jersey's primary battery, and what classes a battleship as a battleship, are the big guns. New Jersey carries 9 16-inch 50-caliber Mark 7 rifles in 3 3-gun turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft. Weighing over 2,000 tons in total, more than most World War II destroyers, and extending almost 50 feet into the hull, each turret required a crew of up to 80 sailors to man efficiently. The gunhouse held 30 crewmen, divided between the turret officer's booth, where the turret could be controlled locally, and the 3 isolated gun pits. The officer's booth contained an optical rangefinder, though the rangefinder in Turret 1 was removed in the 1950s. Here you can also find a Mark III rangekeeper, an electromechanical analog computer, which allowed the turret to calculate its own firing solution, automatically training the turret and elevating the barrels in order to hit where a target would be when the shell arrived. The fire control switchboard allows any of the 3 turrets to remote control the other 2 by transmitting its firing solution to them. These systems, however, were just the emergency backup. In normal operation, firing solutions were calculated remotely in one of the ship's 2 main battery plotting rooms. Here, a larger electromechanical analog computer, the Mark VIII Rangekeeper, used information from the main gun directors and the fire control radar to control all 3 turrets. Each turret had 2 shell flats, which could store 212 rounds of ammunition each. Here, shells were moved via a method called parbuckling to the shell hoists to be delivered to the gunhouse. Turret 2 also possesses a mezzanine deck, an additional shell storage area that allows Turret 2 to be positioned above Turret 1. New Jersey carried both 1,900-pound high-capacity rounds for shore bombardment and 2,700-pound armor-piercing rounds, capable of penetrating up to 17 inches of armor or 30 feet of concrete. Below the shell flats is the powder flat, where powder bags were transferred from the magazines to the powder hoists via the flash-proof scuttles. Each powder bag weighed 110 pounds, and each round required 6 powder bags. In total, New Jersey's guns could fire at a rate of 2 shots a minute for all 9 guns at a maximum effective range of 23 miles. Numerous smaller anti-aircraft guns were fitted on the ship during World War II. These consisted of the quad 40mm Bofor anti-aircraft gun mounts and the 20mm Oerlikons. Originally equipped with 16 40mm Bofors, the total number was increased to 20 by the end of the war in response to Japanese kamikaze attacks. Each mount required a crew of 11, and each barrel could fire up to 160 rounds a minute to a range of about 11,000 yards. The smaller Oerlikon mounts required a crew of 2 to 4 and could fire about 300 rounds a minute to a range of about 4,500 yards. The New Jersey carried 47 20mm Oerlikons at the start of the war, but this was later increased to 57. Although the Oerlikon is credited with shooting down 32% of Japanese aircraft, it lacked good stopping power against kamikazes. All 20mm mounts were removed by 1954, while all the 40mm mounts were removed prior to her Vietnam deployment in 1968. 2 of the protective gun tubs from the Bofor guns were converted into swimming pools during the battleship's Vietnam deployment. Recommissioned for the 3rd time in 1968, the New Jersey would serve only a single deployment off the coast of Vietnam. Firing more shells than her World War II and Korean War deployments put together, the New Jersey is estimated to have saved the lives of 100 U.S. servicemen a day during her Vietnam service. She did her job too well, in fact. While the crew and public were told the battleship would be retired again due to the excessive cost of operating her, the true reason was more political. The North Vietnamese refused to progress on the Paris peace negotiations while the New Jersey was active. Her third commissioning ended in December of 1969, after less than 2 years. The crew's mess decks were used for meals. Renovated in the 1980s, the crew's galley was divided into two halves. One side of the galley served more complete meals, while the other side specialized in simpler fast food-inspired chow, including a McDonald's-esque burger. Below the mess decks are extensive crew berthing. Aft are the ship's brig, dry cleaning facilities, washing machines, dryers, and steam presses. Each washing machine could handle 100 pounds of wash at a time, each dryer 50. Only dress shirts or officers' uniforms were pressed after drying. Laundry was collected once a week and typically took 1 to 3 days to complete. The brig, operated by the ship's Marine detachment, would typically hold prisoners for 3-day sentences. During World War II, it also held prisoners of war. It was eliminated from this location during the third commissioning, eventually becoming a gym in the 1980s. It was restored to its original appearance by museum staff. The ship also possessed a complex dental facility and sickbay, able to treat any manner of injury or illness. The dental clinic was divided into checkup, surgical, and x-ray areas, while sickbay, located a deck below, was equipped with examination, x-ray, and surgical compartments, as well as an extensive recovery ward and pharmacy. The ship's size, plus a greater likelihood of carrying higher-trained doctors or surgeons, also meant that she was able to service crew from smaller, less-equipped ships and treat maladies that they could not. The machine shop was used to tool new parts and make repairs. With multiple lathes and drill presses, the machine shop could create gears, shafts, valves, and make repairs to the ship's many motors. As the ship has too many individual systems to carry spare parts for all of them, the machine shop was vital to her smooth operation. New Jersey was also able to make parts for smaller fleetmates that did not have extensive machine shops of their own. All of the ship's vital systems are contained within the Citadel, the armored core of the battleship. Protected under the 6-inch armor deck, the 12-inch inclined armored belt, and a series of voids and bulkheads, the Citadel contains the ship's engineering plant, the magazines, and the plotting rooms. New Jersey is designed to still be able to float and fight so long as the Citadel and turrets are intact, even if everything forward or aft or above is flooded or destroyed. New Jersey's armor proved more than enough protection during her career. Summoned back to life for service in the Korean War in the early 1950s, the battleship was hit on Turret 1 by a North Korean shore battery. The shell did little damage to the thick turret armor, though unfortunately, shrapnel struck and killed Seaman First Class Robert Osterwind. He was the only crewman to die aboard due to enemy action. New Jersey would serve 2 deployments in the Korean War and would be decommissioned once again in 1957. Broadway, the longest, widest continuous passageway on the ship, houses the access doors to the ship's engine and fire rooms, as well as the magazines for the 5-inch guns. Each of the ship's 4 fire rooms contains 2 Babcock and Wilcox M-type boilers, generating superheated steam at 859 degrees and nearly 600 psi. Generated steam is funneled into the ship's 4 engine rooms, where it is fed through a high-pressure and a low-pressure turbine, which drive a gear reduction mechanism, each connected to one of the ship's 4 propellers. The New Jersey can achieve a speed of over 33 knots, or about 38 miles per hour, making her the fastest battleship ever built. Each engine room also contains 2 steam-powered ship service turbo generators to produce the ship's electricity, as well as an electric control panel to ensure power is distributed evenly. The ship's fantail features a helipad, allowing helicopters like the Sea Sprite to launch and recover. In the 1940s, 2 aircraft catapults were fitted on the stern, allowing the ship to launch float planes. Float plane and helicopter alike were used to perform reconnaissance missions and conduct artillery spotting, relaying the accuracy of salvos back to the battleship. When float planes returned to the ship, they would land on the water alongside and be hoisted back aboard with a stern-mounted crane. With the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union gone, Battleship New Jersey was decommissioned for the last time in February 1991. She was towed to New Jersey in 2001 to become a museum ship, finding her permanent dock on the Delaware River in Camden, only a few miles away from the former Philadelphia Naval Yard where her career began over 75 years ago. And it is here that she shall remain, sharing her story of firepower for freedom with future generations of visitors.